You have found the Dumb Christian, and we are going to jump into John chapter 9 today of this ancient text called the Bible, where Jesus encounters a man born blind, and his healing extends beyond just the physical. But it's going to challenge us. It should challenge us to really consider, is God good in the middle of bad things happening, even when he seems to be the source of things we might consider to be bad? Yeah, the Bible's about to get very real. We might get a little bit colorful, so buckle up and welcome to Dumb Christian. All right, here we go. John chapter 9. Jesus is growing in popularity. He's getting a lot of momentum. A lot of people are believing in him, and he's actually drawing a lot of congregant members from other churches, per se. You know, the religious leaders of the day have their congregations, have their people, right, that are supporting them, that make them popular, and everyone wants to listen to them, but people are actually starting to listen to Jesus instead, and Jesus has a very different message than the religious elite of the day, the celebrity preachers of the day. And so these religious leaders, the people in charge of the Jewish culture, they gather around and they say, anyone caught glorifying or honoring or talking about Jesus in a positive light will be exiled. We're going to cast them out of the Jewish community. Now, this is a really significant implications for someone in that day. You know, for us, we might get kicked out of our friend group, fine, but we're at school, we can find other friends. We're at work, we can hang out with other people, fine. We can find another social media outlet to connect with people and make friends. But they didn't have those types of networks back then, and so the people that you lived with were the people you shared every aspect of your life with. And if you're exiled from your community, you don't get to buy or sell goods. You don't get to make a living. You're going to have to go far outside of your community because everyone you live with is everyone you share your life with. So if you're kicked out of the Jewish community, you might as well move to another country and not another city because word travels fast. Hey, don't associate with this person. They've been excommunicated from the Jewish culture. So they're taking this Jesus thing very seriously, and we're actually going to see that people are very, very afraid of the possibility of getting excommunicated and exiled. But that's the stage that's setting for Jesus as he and his disciples enter into town. And his disciples are still trying to figure out how to harmonize this new worldview that Jesus is teaching them alongside all the ways that they've understood the world to work. And karma is a very kind of a fluid, integral part of the Jewish worldview. Not karma in the classical sense, but in a very basic sense. You know, the idea is if you're righteous, if you do the things that you're supposed to do, if you're a good person according to the law, God will bless you and honor you. He'll make you healthy. He'll make you rich. He'll give you big family, all those kinds of things. But if you're a sinful person, if you're a sinner, if you're a piece of shit, God is going to give you bad things into your life. He will cause harmful things to happen to you. And so they assume that if you're rich and wealthy, you have God's favor. And if you're sick, miserable, and poor, it's because of sin. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Yeah. And so Jesus and his disciples are making their way into town, and they see this plethora of sick, invalid people on the side of the road. And almost like a self-guided tour of sinners, right? So they approach this one exhibit who happens to be a man born blind from birth. And they say, Jesus, and they're just speculating, you know, looking at the specimen, going back and forth, reading the brochure about this man born blind. Jesus, what kind of sin would cause someone to be born blind? Did his parents sin so atrociously that their child was born blind? Or was he going to sin at some point in his life and God knew it ahead of time? So instead of letting him sin, he created him blind so that he wouldn't have committed this sin, or it was so whatever. I mean, you can get really lost in the spider web of whose sin and, you know, knowing things ahead of time. Anyway, so did his parents sin, or did he sin in some manner that caused him to be born blind? And Jesus just kind of like has this like, oh, you people, how long do I have to be with you? And he says, no. Look, that idea that if you're rich, healthy, wealthy, and got a good car, you're in God's favor, or if you're living a worthless life, you must be a terrible person. That's not how God works. Sometimes shit just happens and life sucks. Sometimes people are just born blind. Not because God's punishing someone or rewarding someone else. That's just because it's the brokenness of the world that we live in. It's not perfect. But this man was born blind so that the works of God might be evident. This phrase should hang us up a little bit. This man was born blind so that the works of God might be evident. It sounds like what Jesus is saying is that this man was born blind so God could do something cool. Okay, that might not sit well with us. And to be fair, in all honesty, it probably shouldn't sit very well with us if that's simply the case. If God caused this man to be born blind just so that he could flex his God powers, watch what I can do, then yeah, that's a little unnerving, a little unsettling. But what we're going to discover through Jesus and this whole story of what is about to happen is going to take us somewhere that it's going to make that phrase mean something to us that maybe we've totally missed. It's not just so that God can flex his superpowers, but it's going to change everything. So, maybe if that doesn't sit well with you, hang on, just hold your horses, and just bear with me a little bit because I think we're going to discover something really incredible. So Jesus says, this man is born blind so that the works of God can be evident. And then what he does is he spits on the dry, dusty, aerated earth, and he starts to swirl his finger in his spit on the ground, and he turns the dust into mud, and then he scoops the mud up in his hands, and he smears it on the guy's eyes. And then he says, go wash that mud off your face in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So Jesus sent him to go wash in the pool called Sent. There's probably something there, but I'm not smart enough to know what it is. There is something interesting, though, that I've noticed that when Jesus does miracles, there's a couple of integral parts. Jesus does something to interact with the person he's healing, whether he makes mud or he like gives a wet willy to a deaf guy one time. And then there's some sort of response on the person being healed on their part. And so he says, take up your mat, stand up. He says, go wash. There's usually Jesus interacting and the person being healed interacting. There's a couple of parts pretty typically whenever we see something like this happen. So Jesus says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Somehow he finds his way to the pool of Sent, washes the mud off of his eyes, and as he starts to blink and clear up his view, he can actually see. What? This man, he's at least 20, probably older, mid-30s, let's say. He has never seen before in his whole life. Somebody spit and made spit mud. Jesus made spit mud, rubbed it in his eyes, and told him to go wash, and then he can see. What is happening? So he rushes home to tell his parents and his neighbors and his friends and everyone he grew up with, everyone that has known he's been blind since birth. You guys, I just met this guy named Jesus. He made spit mud, put it on my eyes. I washed and now I see. Wait, what? And at first, like, he's got to be so full of joy and life and vigor that you ever like don't recognize someone when they're not acting in their normal like personality. This guy comes bouncing into the neighborhood. I can see. And they're like, who the hell is this guy? No one gives a shit, man. Who are you? And then he's like, no, I'm Terry. We're just giving him the name Terry. It's me, Terry, the blind guy. They say, how are you seeing? And he says, well, I met this guy named Jesus. He made spit mud, put it on my eyes. After I washed it off, I could see. No, seriously, what is happening? How did this happen? No, seriously. Jesus made spit mud, put it on my eyes, I washed, and now I see. Beth, come here. You got to hear this. This is Terry. Terry that we grew up with. Yes. Tell Beth what you just told me. I met this guy named Jesus. He made spit mud. He put it on my eyes. I washed it off. Now I see. No. And then these conversations start to break off, and other people are telling other people, and they're telling other people. And as Terry's making his way through the neighborhood, he encounters another group of people who are talking about his healing, and they don't recognize him. They say, hey, have you heard about this guy who just got healed from blindness? He'd been blind his whole life. Have you heard about this? And Terry's like, yeah. I'm the guy that was healed. No. He was just now healed like hours ago. He was right out here. We grew up with him. Have you heard about this? Yeah, I'm the guy. It's me. I'm the one that Jesus healed. Wait. Terry? You're the guy that Jesus healed? Yes, I'm the guy. And word is like spreading like crazy. And so they grab him and they're trying to process and understand, because Terry's story keeps involving Jesus. Jesus healed a man blind from birth, and they know they're not supposed to talk about Jesus. Remember, the Pharisees laid out this rule: you can't glorify Jesus. You can't talk about Jesus in a positive light. So they don't know what to do with this. How can we talk trash about Jesus when he's doing these incredible works of God? So they bring Terry to the Pharisees. And they say, what are we supposed to do with this? Because this doesn't line up with what you've been teaching us about God and Jesus. How are we supposed to harmonize the miraculous power of God at work in Jesus with you telling us that Jesus is a horrible, terrible sinner? And they kind of look over Terry and they analyze, they discuss among themselves, and they say, we don't believe he was born blind. There's no evidence, no proof that supports he was born blind. This is all a ruse. Jesus probably just convinced this guy or paid this guy to tell people he was born blind. And the crowd is like, no, man, we know him. We grew up with Terry. This guy was born blind for real. No, go get his parents. So they bring in his parents. But remember, there are some people that are absolutely terrified of being kicked out of the Jewish community, and his parents are in that group. So the Pharisees ask his parents, is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see? And they say, yes, he's our son. Yes, we know he was born blind. He's been blind his whole life. But because they're afraid to give honor and credit to Jesus, they say, but how he now sees, we don't know. Go ask him. He's old enough to account for himself. He's not a little kid just making up tall tales. He's an adult, a mature adult, responsible for himself legally. Go ask him. So they bring him back into the room. All right. Let's just say hypothetically that you're telling the truth. I think it's bullshit, but we'll play your game for a second. How did he give you your sight back? Okay, this is crazy, guys. But Jesus made spit mud. He put it on my eyes. I washed, and now I see. And the religious leaders get hung up on the very first part. He did what? He made mud? Now, this is the Sabbath day, so it's like Saturday, probably. Somewhere between Friday night and Saturday night. That's called the Sabbath, where you're supposed to rest. You're not supposed to do any work whatsoever. And there are real serious consequences if you do work on the Sabbath. Not that they enforce it, but you know, they want the drama. They like the drama. And so they say, nope, you can't make mud on the Sabbath. This is actually an additional rule. It's not one that God laid out. He said, don't work. But the Jewish community, especially the religious elite, they started to add all these extra perimeters and boundaries to God's rules just to try and, help supposedly make it easier for people to not accidentally sin. And so one of these additional rules that they come up with is you can't make mud. The reasoning is because that's how you make bricks, out of mud. So the assumption is if you're making mud, it's only for the purpose of making bricks. So therefore you cannot even make mud. That's considered work. And Jesus is breaking these man-made rules and traditions. How dare he? He's a horrible, terrible sinner. He can't be doing the works of God because he's breaking the Sabbath. He is sinful, and this is outrageous. And the man who was born blind, Terry, the names of the innocent have been changed. And he says, look, I don't know how, I don't have a degree. I don't have a Bible college degree. I haven't even read the whole Bible. The way you guys, your big religiosity words and the way that you talk about God, you're so smart. I realize I can't hold a candle to you guys. I don't know anything about whether or not Jesus is a sinner. All I know is I once was blind, but now I see. I don't know all your fancy little loopholes and all the ways that you're supposed to believe in and worship and all that stuff. All I know is that the finger of God is at work in this guy, Jesus. And they say, man, what do you know? You were born in utter sin. Now, this idea that the disciples were struggling with, his blindness must be a result of sin, is the same thing that the religious leaders have been telling him his whole life. You were born blind because of sin. Your identity is directly connected with sin, whether it's yours or someone else's. The reason your life sucks is because of sin. And you have no right to make any claims or to talk about God in any way because your identity is so directly connected with your sin, with sin in general, you can't possibly know anything right about God. So shut your mouth. Shut your mouth when you're talking to me because you don't know what you're saying. And the man who was born blind says, look, no one in the history of the world has ever been born blind and then been miraculously healed and given their sight back. What your guys are saying doesn't make sense. It doesn't hold up. How does this fit together? How does this real world thing that happened, I experienced healing from blindness, how does it fit with what you're saying? Because you guys talk a big game and you have all these loopholes and these fancy word phrases that go together to justify and give you this like worldview on God, but it doesn't fit. Your expressions of God, your explanations of God don't fit with what I've literally just experienced. And it's not like this thought that occurred in my head. It's a literal physical revelation, an expression, an experience of God. I've been healed, and it doesn't fit with what you're telling everyone about God. And they say, bitch, please, you don't know what you're talking about. Get out. And so they kick Terry out of the synagogue. They've had enough. Remember earlier, they laid down the law. If you're going to talk in a positive way about Jesus, you're getting kicked out. And sure enough, Terry gets kicked out because they won't have it. They refuse to listen. So Terry is kicked out. But he says, you know what? I don't even care. I can see. And something began to happen in this man born blind, that not only did Jesus heal his ability to see the world around him, but this sparked in this man, in everyone in his neighborhood, even in some of the Pharisees, and then it began to spread throughout, in a very real sense, the entire nation of Israel. That the work that God had done through this blind man was not simply to give him his sight back, but to give a revelation to everyone that God is not who these religious leaders taught him to be. The world moves on as people continue to break it and come up with their own ideas of what's real, right, true, and good. And they begin to teach their kids, and they teach their kids. And there's this long history of really, in a very real sense, manipulation and spiritual abuse through the ways that God is being taught. And this work that God is doing is not simply a weird flex, okay, for him to show up and do a miraculous healing on the blind man, to give him sight once again, physical sight, but to actually give revelation, spiritual sight to this man and everyone else that is discovering God is not just this, if you're good, I'll give you good things. If you're bad, you're going to get a spanking type of God. He's not up there waiting for us to screw up so he can squish us. There's something about God that actually he wants to give a man born blind his sight back. There's something about God that extends beyond this framework of karma. I don't necessarily understand how it works, he thinks to himself, but God certainly isn't this mean old angry guy in the clouds waiting for us to screw it up. And he's just trying to process. Like in a matter of hours, this guy's literally, his entire being is just changed. Not only can he see physically now, but everything he knew about God has been flipped upside down. And so his whole universe has been changed. And he's just trying to process. I can't imagine the overwhelming awe and wonder that he's trying to process everything he's just discovered. And when Jesus hears that he was kicked out, Jesus goes looking for him. And he finds him standing on a bridge. I imagine it's coming to the end of the day, the end of Sabbath, and the Terry's just standing on a bridge, looking out at this incredible sunset over Jerusalem and the hills, the hill valleys, and it's starting to just go beyond the crest of the mountains in the background. And he's just taking it all in. He doesn't even care that he's been kicked out of the synagogue. Jesus finds him. Hey man, how's it going? How's that new eyesight? And he says, oh Jesus, this is incredible. Man, and the fact that God would want to give me my sight, I just don't understand how this all works, why it works, what it all means. And Jesus says, yeah, it's pretty crazy. But let me ask you something. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Now, he's already got 100 million things going on in his brain. So I imagine it's got to be pretty difficult for him to take a second and really logically understand what Jesus is about to reveal to him. But this is the guy who gave him his sight back and shattered his God view. So he's going to certainly try his best. And he says, well, who is the Son of Man that I can believe in him? And Jesus says, yo, I'm the guy to believe in. Man, you want to know God rightly? Believe in me. And he says, oh, hell yeah, I believe. Hell yes, I am in. Man, Jesus, you have given me the true living water, the bread of life, the words of God. Hell yeah, I believe. And Jesus says, yeah. Well, that's really why I'm here is so that to give sight to the blind, and not just that physical sight that you're enjoying right now, but that spiritual sight that's changing everything about the way that you see and interact with the world, people, yourself, and God. And some Pharisees are kind of in the background, just close enough to hear, because they're murmuring, they're talking trash about Terry and Jesus. And they eavesdrop and they can hear Jesus say that he's come to give sight to the blind. And they say, oh, Jesus, what are you trying to say, that we're blind? And Jesus, these guys again. And he turns around and he says, look, because you think you know all the answers, because you got a spiritual stick up your ass, yeah, you're blind. You don't know what you're talking about. If you weren't so pretentious, if you had a little bit of humility and acknowledge that you didn't know everything, then yeah, I would say you you were guiltless, just like Terry here. He wasn't born blind because of sin, but because you claim to know everything, you're hoity-toity. Yeah, you're blind. And then he turns back around, looks at Terry, and he says, ignore those guys. And with his arm around him, they just watch the sun dip past the horizon and enjoy truly seeing for the first time ever. And that is John chapter 9, where Jesus heals a blind man to display the works of God, not so that he can do a weird flex of miraculous powers, but so that he can change the world in how we understand who God is and what he really wants to do in our lives. Yeah, I've been your host, Jonathan the Dumb Christian. I love you guys. Catch you later. And there it is, John chapter 9. Do wrestle with it. Read it for yourself, because I added plenty of little ad-libs and some artistic liberties. So read it for yourself. God said it the way he wants to say it. He'll always say it better than I can say it. I'm just a dumb Christian trying to wrap my head around it. Be sure to check out our YouTube, Dumb Christian Podcast. Hit subscribe, like, ring that bell. Here comes the butler. I've got cookies and milk. I love you guys. Catch you later.